Good morning, everyone. Good morning. This morning we're talking about dissolving the unreal. And I didn't even realize it at the time that the title came to me. It's actually a chapter, one chapter in Osho's book, Dissolve the Unreal. And the title just struck me. That's really kind of what we've been talking about for the last several weeks, dissolve the unreal. But what I realized this morning is how succinct that phrase is. Because you can't fight the unreal. You can't struggle against the unreal. You can't defeat the unreal because it's not there. It's not real, you see? And this is what our ego likes to do. You know, like Don Quixote, who sees something to struggle against in everything. We create these windmills in our minds, and we have this sense of struggling against them. And as long as we are struggling against them, they are real to us. But the only life and the only energy that they have is that which we have given to them. So we can't struggle against them anymore to make them go away. We have to let them dissolve. We have to let them dissolve. So it reminds me of when the children were small and they would have a bad dream. And of course, little kids, they really don't know the difference between a dream and being awake. They think that the dream is real. So if they have a frightening dream and they think that there's a monster in the room, they become frightened. And if an adult goes into the room to comfort the child, it doesn't help at all to tell the children intellectually, well, don't be silly. There's no such thing as monsters. There's no such thing as these creepy crawly things in the shadows. You can't talk them out of it. You see, their emotions are involved. They're vested in this feeling. They know what they were experiencing, which was fright. And the only way you're going to be able to calm that child down is turn on the light. Dissolve the shadows. Turn on the light. When they get to experience that there's nothing there, perhaps they'll get out of bed and look under the bed with you or look in the closet with you. When they get to experience that there's nothing there, you see, then they can let it go. Then they can let it go. We must dissolve the unreal. That's what we're talking about today. And of course, we're not talking about monsters in your dreams because we're not children anymore. We are adults. We have moved into a different phase of the dream. We recognize that what happens when we are asleep is a dream and it's not real. But we are stuck in the belief that what we experience when we are awake is real. And perhaps it's just another level of the dream. Perhaps much of what we think we know is also unreal. See, I think it's not the things that we don't know that are such a great hindrance to our progress on the spiritual path. If we are intent and dedicated to progress on our path, we will be led to that which is appropriate at the time, whether it be something we need to read, something we need to hear, a technique we need to practice. But as long as we are holding on to that which is unreal, it's difficult to go forward. So it is the things that we believe to be true that are not true that we hold on to. Those are the things that impede our progress. In the Sermon on the Mount, Emmett Fox wrote a beautiful book about the Sermon on the Mount, kind of interpreting the Sermon on the Mount. And we all, just because of the culture that we grew up in, we're all kind of familiar with different parts of it. But one of them says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the poor in spirit." And I think it goes on and says, "For they shall see God." And Emmett Fox says, well, we don't understand what to be poor in spirit is, We kind of can look at that and say, well, we have to go around and act like we're poor and wear sackcloth and put ashes on our head and things like that, trying to do the best we can with interpreting it. And he says that's not what it means at all. It means we have to let go of our preconceived notions. We have to be poor in spirit. We have to be willing to, as they say in Buddhism, have the Zen mind, the beginner's mind. We have to be willing to say that everything that I ever believed might only be partly right. And I'm willing to let it go. I'm willing to let it go. This being Halloween, of course, lots of different ghost stories are appearing in the papers and everything, and haunted houses and all those sorts of things. And, I do some volunteer work at a local history museum and do some AV work for them. And the lady who runs it down there is one of my friends. And she posted a picture. And she told me this story one time when I was down there, and we were talking about paranormal events at the museum, and she posted this picture of a mirror. So this house that this building that the museum is in is very old. I think it was like built in the 1840s, 1848. It's an antebellum building. It was once a school, a ladies' boarding school, and it was a doctor's house, and all these different things that it was over time. But when you first go into the entranceway, there's a parlor off to the left, just like it might have been 150 years ago. There's a little piano in there. There's a couch. There's a couple chairs for sitting, and of course there's some historical exhibits in there. There's this big mirror hanging on the wall above the mantel of the fireplace. A big kind of fancy wood trim around it. And the picture that she posted, there's a face in the mirror looking back out at you. And she took that picture and she said she had people come in and people would go and they would look at it and they would see it and it was eerie and it was spooky and there was this face that was just kind of staring out of the mirror, And she said one day her daughter came in and got some Windex and a rag and squirted the mirror and wiped it down, and the face was gone. The face had been built up in layers of dust that had settled in exactly that pattern on the mirror over time. And just dissolving that dust, just removing that dust, you see, it went away. Now, of course, you can go deeper and say, but why did the dust form in that particular pattern? What was it that caused it to look like a face looking back at us? Was there a spirit there trying to make its presence known? And all these things that the speculation around Halloween go into. But my point is that it was layers of dust. It was layers of dust on the mirror. And now people can believe that was an entity that was there. They can believe all kinds of things. But it was dust. It was dust on the mirror. Now, suppose somebody looking into that mirror suffered an illusion. Suppose they looked at that and they said, oh, that's me. That's me. That's my reflection. That image that I see is my reflection, you see. Suppose that they believed that they were the dust on the mirror. And that would affect that would affect their lives. You see, that would affect the way that they behave. That would affect the way that they interact with the world. You remember the movie Nurse Betty? I think it was Renee Zellweger played the lead role in it. But the lady was so involved in the characters in the soap opera that she believed that they were real, and she believed that she was one of the characters, that she was Nurse Betty. Now you can see in that movie, you can see that it was not real, right? It was a story. And it was a story that she believed to be true, and she was living her life. She was living her life as if that were real. But it was not. So imagine somebody looking in the mirror and seeing this image looking back out at them. And they have the illusion that that is them, that is who they are. And they behave accordingly. So last week or the week before, remember we were talking about activity of mind. We were talking about movement of consciousness, which is what we call mind. And we said that happiness could be kind of a motive force in our lives. That if we do more of that which makes us happy and less of that which makes us unhappy, that in itself will lead us in our growth. Right? Remember I said some of us were taught when we were little, oh, you shouldn't want to be happy because that's selfish. But what we eventually learn is that being selfish and being unhappy go together. That the only way that we can be happy is not to be selfish, to be truly happy. So we can use happiness, or as Alan Cohn's book says, joy is my compass. We can use happiness as kind of a guide, Is this thing that I am considering, does it lead to a greater experience of happiness? Dr. Holmes says the only thing we need to consider is this thing that I wish to do, does it give a greater expression to life and to love and to truth and to beauty? And does it harm anyone or take anything away from anyone? And if it gives expression to that which we would say is good, and it doesn't harm anyone or take anything away from anyone, then go for it. Then go for it. See, it could be that simple. It could be that simple. So the Dalai Lama says, we can learn to be happy. We can be happy, but it comes through training the mind. Training the mind. And then we have to go into what is mind and how do we train it. And we said, well, mind is this movement of consciousness that we experience as we go through life. We think about this, we think about that, we think about the other thing, and it is moving constantly. And it is this movement constantly back and forth, jumping from here to there, the grasshopper mind of the kung fu movies, the monkey mind of the Buddhists, the unstill mind, if you want to call it that. Remember the Old Testament says, be still and know. Be still and know. And this mind is jumping from here to here to here to here to here. And because it's doing that, we don't get to experience the beauty that is. So as the mind is jumping from here to here to here to here to here, it's like layers of dust being laid down on the mirror. These are memories. These are memories. So we go through life and we have an experience. Remember when I was talking about the process of change? We tend to think that people resist change, but people don't. But it's their paradigms or their mental maps that resist change. They have a way, they think there's a way that things are and the way that things ought to be, and they keep trying to arrange life so that looks right to them. That's the way it is. That's the way it ought to be. So we go through life, we have an experience, and if something else happens at that same time, we put two and two together when they don't necessarily go together. So W. Clement Stone gave the example of he was a traveling salesman, went around the country selling life insurance, and he stopped at a restaurant one night and they had frog legs on the menu. And he had never had them, but all of his friends ate them and told him how good they were. So he ordered them and they were terrible. And he decided at that time, that he just didn't like frog's legs. He said for 20 years he didn't eat frog's legs. And then one night he was at in a hotel and a bunch of his friends were staying there. They were traveling salesmen too. And they sat down and they said, you know, this hotel has the best frog's legs you've ever had. And he said, I don't like frog's legs. He said, oh, you don't know what you're missing. They're excellent here. You really need to try them. And they kind of talked him into it. And when they came and he tasted them, they were delicious. And he said what he realized was there was something wrong with that first batch of frog legs that he had. They had spoiled or they weren't prepared right or something. But he made an inference. He assumed that he just didn't like frog's legs. That was dust on the mirror, you see. That was dust on the mirror. And he spent the next 20 years of his life not eating frog's legs because the dust on his mirror told him that they were bad. And that was not true. That was unreal. Our experience, your experience and my experience in life, as I mentioned previously, we identify with that activity of mind. We identify with that activity of the intellect. And we don't realize that we are the one observing that activity. Right? This is why many meditation techniques teach us to become the witness, to become the observer. As we start to recognize that we are not this activity that is flitting from here to there to everywhere, but that is activity that we can either identify with and become engaged with, or we can disidentify with. We can step back and we can watch it. See, we can be aware of it. As we become more and more identified with the observer, we become less and less identified with the dust on the mirror, the memories, the things that we believe to be true that are not true, the ideas of separation, the ideas of limitation, the ideas of being only human. These are things we learned. These are things that we assumed. And now it is time to say to ourselves, everything that I have ever assumed may be wrong, or at best is only partially right. And I will not let my life and my growth be governed by the dust on the mirror. Can you imagine someone going back to that mirror after it had been wiped down and thinking, oh my goodness, what have they done? They have destroyed the image here. We need to put it back. And they went and they tried to get dust and they tried to attach dust back to that mirror and they tried to make it back the way it was, you see. But that is exactly what you and I do. When we have opinions about the way things are that are not based in reality and the way things ought to be, and we keep trying to arrange the world, our experience in the world, we keep trying to arrange it so that it looks that way. So we have as human beings, we have this faculty called the intellect. And the way the intellect works is it analyzes and it divides and it forms opinions of things. Right? It's very important to remember that it divides things in order to analyze them. It's like it can't eat the whole elephant at once. So it tries to break it down into bite-sized pieces. And what it is doing is it is creating division where there is no division. And it's only doing it because that's the way it needs to work in order to understand. You've heard me use the example of the ocean. You know, you go down to the beach and you stand on the shore and you look at the ocean. And somebody says, "What ocean is that?" You know, and you say, "Oh, well, that's the Atlantic Ocean." You know, and depending upon where you are, it may even have other names. You know, it might be, well, that's Lower New York Bay, out right there. You know. If you were standing in Europe looking at the same ocean, you might give it a different name. It's a different bay. You know, if you were standing in California looking at the ocean, you would say it was the Pacific. But there's only one ocean. There's just one. In order for us to be able to function, we give it different names. But the names are unreal. It's all just ocean. It's all just water, you see. So as we become engaged with something, particularly something new, as we're growing, as we're children and we're growing, and we start to experience new things, we're forming these ideas, we're forming these opinions, we're forming these memories, we're putting dust on our mirror, right? The mirror represents the stillness, the beauty, the love, the spiritual nature that is our truth. It is there, but it is covered by layer and layer and layer of dust. And as we go through life, we form these opinions, and these opinions represent another layer of dust on our mirror. And as we look through those layers of dust, we think that they are real, and that is the way things ought to be, and that is who we are. Because one of the opinions that the intellect forms is the opinion of our identity, our ego. We start to believe, I am like this, I am not like that. I am this, I am not that. You know, we are given an identity of our tribe. You know, well, we are like this, and we are not like those people over there. And the intellect keeps dividing that which is in itself not divided. And it separates us. It separates us. And we have this little jug or this little vessel called the ego. And it's just full of all kinds of misinformation about who we are and what we are. And one of those primary beliefs is that we are separate. We are isolated. We are different. Dr. Holmes tells us that all of the problems that we face in life, right, and this is what the intellect does, right? The intellect looks for a problem and it tries to solve it. Looks for a problem and it tries to solve it. And I was reading an Osho this morning, he says, the intellect can only solve a problem created by the intellect. I'll leave you to think about that one for a while. For example, mathematics. You can use mathematics to solve a problem that was created by mathematics, you know. I just did a flashback, you know, we've all been there, the word problems in math when the teacher says, well, you know, you're on a train that left New York headed for Chicago, and there's another train that left Chicago headed for New York, and one's going 100 miles an hour, the other's going 10 miles an hour. When are they going to pass, you know? And I just kept thinking, I don't want to go to Chicago. I don't even want to be on this train. Why do I care, you know? But they give you a problem and then you have to solve it. The mind creates the problem, the mind has to solve the problem. So we have this little vessel, we have this little this little jug, this little thing called the ego. And it's like that mirror covered with glass or with dust. And we believe the dust is us. We believe that that is who we are. We believe that that is the way we must be. Now, I'll just give you a quick example. Suppose you wanted to know something. Suppose you were doing a research paper, for example, and you wanted to know how to do something. And you can imagine you go to the library and you find different books on the topic and you read the books and you got your little index cards and you're taking your copious citation notes on your index cards. So when you write your research paper, you can properly give your attributions, And you get all of this different information. You read this information. You kind of assemble it into some order that tells the story that you want to tell. And you put the books back on the shelf. Now, you wouldn't think that you were the content of the books. You wouldn't identify with the content of the books. They were just something that were a tool that you used in order to accomplish something that you wanted to accomplish, you see. The memories that we have, the activity of mind, these are tools that we can use, but we must learn to dissolve the unreal. We must learn to recognize that what is unreal is that they are not us. I am not that collection of memories. I am not that collection of experiences. I am the one who had the memory. I am the one who was there and observed the memory. I observed the experience, but I am not defined and I am not limited by that experience. So what we come to recognize then, where we come on our spiritual path, is to dissolve that which is unreal. You cannot fight it. You cannot struggle against it. Because the more you fight against it, the more real it becomes to you. And we come to recognize then that this thing that we call ego, which is the vessel that holds this accumulation of ideas that are not necessarily real, now this is something to be dissolved. The ideas that are in the vessel are to be dissolved, that's one way. And shattering the vessel, completely dissolving the ego, is another way. This is the dissolution of ego that you hear talked about from the East. Now this terrifies us in the West because we think we are. Whatever the ego is, that's what we are. And we have to recognize we are not that. We are not that. That is a collection of ideas. That is dust on the mirror. But I am the one observing the mirror. I am the one looking at the mirror. I am not the dust on the mirror. So we're going to talk about a couple different techniques. First, in science of mind, in religious science, we talk about spiritual mind treatment. And spiritual mind treatment is a way of taking any one particular thing that we want to experience differently in our lives and dissolving the erroneous ideas that we hold to be true about that. This is probably a different definition of treatment than you've heard before, but I just want you to think of it this way, that this is what it does. So we start out, for example, we might say, and Emma Kurz Hopkins tells us this, name your good. Name your good. There's good in this world and I ought to have it. Name your good. So we start out and we name our good and we say, well, my good is health. My good is health. That's what I wish to experience. Now, of course, we only are aware of that because we're not experiencing it at the moment. Right? We've got an ache or a pain or some kind of an illness. Something has taken our mind to the point that says, this is not the way it ought to be, and there's good for me and I ought to have it. So now we've named our good. Our good is health. And we recognize then that health is the natural order of the universe, right? That's why they call it dis-ease, lack of ease. Health is the natural state of the universe. Health is the natural state of being. perfect order, perfect divine right action. So using the intellect, we start to take ourselves then to a place of recognizing, well, what do we know about God as it pertains to health? And we say, well, God must be the author of perfect health. And then we say, well, what do we know about ourselves as it relates to God? And we say, well, there's no separation, you see. If all of our problems stem from a sense of separation, then this issue of health must mean that somehow, somewhere in our belief system, in the dust on our mirror, we have allowed ourselves to become separated from God. So we work with that idea to the point of saying, but there can be no separation. There can be none because the divine has created me out of itself. My body is nothing more than the dust of the earth taking the form of this body. The intelligence that could take the dust of the earth and form a body from it certainly can produce perfect health no matter what the disease might appear to be. You see, we use logic and reason. We're kind of talking to ourselves. But as we are talking to ourselves, we start to feel it. And this is important. The feeling is important. We start to drop out of our heads and into our hearts. And we start to feel it until we get to the point of realization that says, because I am one with all that there is, because there is in fact no separation, and because the divine is perfectly healthy, then the divine activity in my body is perfectly healthy, you see. We celebrate that. We celebrate that because it already is. Not because it's going to happen someday, but because it already is. And then we have to surrender it. We have to release it. We have to let it go. We have to know that there's nothing more that we can do at that moment. But we let this power that responds to us according to our belief then do whatever it needs to do to dissolve everything within us that is unlike perfect health. And that is in the dust on our mirror. Now, of course, we move our feet. We do the things that we ought to be doing. If we ought to be changing our diet or exercising or seeing different doctors or all those things. I'm not saying we don't do any of those things, but we do that which we are guided to do. Which we are guided to do. So in this realm then, Dr. Holmes tells us if you take a glass of clear water and you pour some ink in it, the ink will diffuse and the water will be tinted. Right? And you can't go in there and just stick your hand in there and pull the ink out, but you can drip clear water in there slowly. And as the clear water drips in slowly, the jar will flush itself until it is pure water. So think of the things that we do in our spiritual practice of spiritual mind treatment is what we are doing is we are letting clear water in that jar. We are removing the dust from the mirror a little bit at a time. We are letting go a little bit at a time. Then the other thing that we do is when we get into meditation, we work directly on dissolving the vessel, the jug itself, the jar, the ego. We work on letting it go because it's not real, you see. This idea that I am me and I am not you, this is an opinion. This is just an opinion. You can say, well, you know, I've got a hand and you got a hand. We don't have the same hand. Physical bodies, we have different physical bodies, but they are the same stuff. They are the dust of the earth. The dust of the earth has taken the form of your body. The dust of the earth has taken the form of my body. And someday it will go back to being the dust of the earth. So the appearance of separation was a temporary, impermanent condition. And yet we want to look at the temporary and impermanent conditions and assume that they are permanent. And we are only partially right. We are probably wrong. So when we go into meditation then, if you think of treatment as slowly dissolving the erroneous ideas, getting rid of the things that we believe to be true that are not, getting rid of the unreal that way, dissolving it, meditation then is like taking a sledgehammer to the jug. smashing it and letting it go. So when we sit and we observe, when we become the observer, when we can see the activity of the monkey mind and rather thinking and not thinking that I am that activity of the monkey mind, then we have stepped back one step away from the mirror, one step away from the dust. And we no longer have to be entangled. Now we are aware. We are aware that this monkey mind has been flitting back and forth, putting down tracks of dust on the mirror for as long as we can remember. For as long as we can remember, and probably longer. It has been putting down these tracks of dust on the mirror, and we have been looking through that dust, thinking that we are that. Thinking that we are that. Instead of just looking at it and saying, oh, well, that's history, you see? That's just history. That's just like those words in the books that I was reading. That's something from long ago that we only go back and use when it's necessary, when it's appropriate. I am not that. That is a tool that I can use. Yes, I did this and I had this experience, and if I have to do this again, then I'll know how to do it, you know. Whatever it might be, write a research paper, fix an engine, all those kind of things. Awareness stops that activity of mind. Remember I talked about the magician who had the whirling mirrors and the lights, and the pilots could not see the Suez Canal behind the lights? We have to stop that activity of the ego. And awareness does that. There's a difference between being aware and the ego. And if we can just be aware of things without identifying with them, we can be aware of the thoughts instead of saying, I am this, I am that, I feel this, I feel that. We disidentify, we come back, and we are at peace, we are still, and we say, isn't that interesting? Oh, look, there goes the thought. Oh, look, there goes the thought. Where did that thought come from? Where did that thought go? You don't answer the questions, you just rhetorical. For whom did the thought arise? Who is the one observing the thought? Who is the one observing the thought? So we sit and we sit in our meditation and we breathe in, and a thought comes, and instead of saying, oh, you know, I need to entertain that thought and follow it, we say, oh, look, there goes the thought. That's it. That's it. If we can be aware, this activity of ego, the ego itself, stops to exist at that moment. You remember I mentioned if something happens and you're going to be, you know, you think you're going to be in an accident, you're driving down the road and something happens and you get startled and you slam on the brakes and you grab the wheel, you know, and you don't think. You just are. You might steer the car and avoid an obstacle. Bring it to a stop safely someplace. When it's all over, somebody says, well, what are you thinking? I say, I wasn't thinking anything. I wasn't thinking, it just was, you see. At that moment of complete awareness, the thought process was totally useless to you. The ego wasn't operating, but there was awareness. So whatever we can do to bring ourselves into periods of awareness. Remember we talked about mindful breathing? Whatever we can do to bring ourselves into that period of awareness is helping to dissolve that which is last thing I'm going to talk about today as far as the technique, we talked about observing the past as if it was a dream. I know we've talked about that before. Taking something that happened in the past and imagining it was playing on a screen in a movie theater, and you were just a disinterested member of the audience watching it go by. See, that's another way to disidentify. It's all passing. It's all transient. It's all temporary. It's all changing anyway. Don't worry about it. But the last technique we're going to talk about today is feeling. Feeling. In the opening treatment, I said feel. Feel this talk. You may hear the words. You may want to try to understand the definition and the way I'm using them and all that. And that's intellectual, but feel the message. Feel what's going on. When we are feeling, we're not thinking. We're not caught up in that activity of mind. When do you feel love? Not think, hey, I'm in love. Not think, oh, I love this person so much, or I love this so much, or I love that so much. But when do you feel love? You see, love is not an intellectual activity. Love is an experience. When can you be totally in an experience? Can you be at the beach at sunrise or at the top of a mountain at sunrise? What do you feel? What do you feel? There's an old saying that says, stop and smell the roses, but don't analyze their fragrance. Get out of your head, get into your feeling. Is it music that you listen to, that you lose yourself in music? Is it art? Is it painting? Is it gardening? Is it being with your pet? Is it being with a child and bouncing them on your knee? What is it that takes you out of your head and into your heart and feel? Feel. In order to move forward on our spiritual path, in order to make progress, it is more a matter of letting go. For there's nothing to attain as everything is already here. Emmett Fox says it's a business of minusing, not plussing. You're never going to be more spiritual than you are right now. You may experience more of it. You may realize more of it through experience. But you're never going to be more spiritual than you are right now. There's a beautiful, clear, still glass beneath all of this layers of dust that we have been laying down with the activity of mind and memory for eons. And now it is time to recognize, I am not that. And as we recognize that I am not that, then this idea of who and what I am also dissolves. It doesn't mean that we're obliterated, but the separation dissolves. And I am one. I am one. I experience the unity that God is. I experience the unconditional love that God is. I experience the peace that God is. I tie up my horse. I take off its saddle. And I stop jousting at the windmills in my mind. They were never there. They were never worth my time and attention. And now I get on with the true business of growth. I feel. I love. I am. And so it is.